Should we get cracking? So, shall I just introduce why I brought NAINA on anyway? I wanted to bring someone on that started something during the pandemic, and Hooversound is a new label started by NAINA and SHERELLE in 2020. Their first release actually came out in the first week of the pandemic, but I've kind of followed what NAINA does for a while since she's been on Reprezent and now working with Apple Music. And it's like great to see people starting new things, new ideas, new branding in this time. And I thought it'd be cool for her to share what she's been working on with you guys. So NAINA, do you want to take it away?
Awesome, thanks Elijah. Hello everyone. So yeah, I'm NAINA. I'm a DJ, presenter, and I run Hooversound with SHERELLE. Yeah, we launched at a really weird time, as Elijah said. We actually came up with the idea because we both met through radio. So we both actually met through Reprezent. We were both championing a lot of left field electronic music. And we got on really, really well, had a lot of common interests. And then we actually went back to back one night. We actually supported the Prodigy at Brixton Academy, which is one of the most surreal nights of my life. But when we were doing that back to back, we were putting our music together. And it was then we realized, oh, we have a lot of artists that are unsigned that haven't been given a platform to shine. So we were thinking we could do something. So we already do this via the radio. We already showcase these artists via Reprezent, for example. But what else can we do? What more can we do for them? And we were just so passionate about it that we thought we could start a label. We have experience in DJing and radio. We have no experience in running a record label. So this was a completely new thing for us. And we were just fully up for the challenge, to be honest. We really we just got really excited about it. We could visualize what the label was going to be like. We knew the sound it was going to have. And we could see it fitting into the London scene because it'd be a good representation of our scene. So one of the first things we did was we created a mood board. So we thought, right, what kind of vibes do we like from other artists, other labels, their logos, their visual identity. So here's a bit of an example of some of the things. So we love Warp, we love Fractal Fantasy, other dance labels, and we really liked how bold they were. Some of them don't use color, they just use black and white. And the idea began to grow. We had the name Hooversound because Hooversound is a type of electronic synth that you hear in a lot of old rave music. And then Hooversound was born. So we went with the globe idea. We actually went for 2 different logos to rotate 2 different styles, but we knew the brand identity was so strong that you would see something from Hooversound, you'd recognize it immediately. So you don't have to always see the globe, for example. You can just see the name and the style and the colors, or lack of colors in this case. So yeah, this is Hooversound. This is what we came up with. So there's a lot of things that you have to do, a lot of things that are super important. So of course, decide your brand identity, decide your name. Also, when you're deciding a name, Google that name and check that that doesn't exist, because you want to stand out, you want to be able to find you on Google, but you also don't want to be treading on anyone's toes who might have registered that as a company. So once you've got that all cleared, the one thing that I did right at the beginning was I'm quite fortunate that I know a few people who run record labels. So through doing radio, I've met these people. So I actually just hit them up and said, look, me and SHERELLE are doing this. Is there any advice you can give to 2 people who are literally starting a new journey? And they gave me some really cool advice. And I think that's really important before you do anything, just speak to people. And that's also speaking to artists. We actually had to speak to a lawyer at the beginning because there's a lot of legal things that we wanted to understand about running a label. And then a lot of people, one of the main bits of advice that they gave me was plan ahead, because it's all about your release schedule and just staying 10 steps ahead. So with that in mind, we were like, right, let's get together a plan and some timelines and a release schedule. So we want to have our first release out, let's say March 2020. It wasn't March 2020, it was the year before. But again, that is all a learning curve because things take a lot longer than you think. So again, we were planning ahead, but we might have not planned ahead enough because it still got delayed. Obviously, do all the admin bits that you need to do. So you create a social media presence, create a website if you like, make sure you've got your SoundCloud, your Facebook, your Bandcamp, all these things that have to all tie together. Register the company as well, that's really important. And then you've got to just keep in the back of your mind all these logistics that you're going to have to plan for. So thinking about, right, we need to pick a distribution company. We need to figure out how we're going to get some contracts together to send to our artists. Things like that, which again, can feel really overwhelming at the beginning, but the more you talk to other people and get a bit of advice on what to do and how to approach these things that might be really new for you, it all becomes very simple because you're learning along the way. So, for example, when it came to contracts, spoke to a few artists, spoke to a few labels, spoke to a lawyer, and that lawyer then put together a contract for us to use as a template. And then now we just change that template for each release depending on what the artist wants. Again, with distribution companies, spoke to a few labels and artists. The thing with distribution companies is that everyone has a different experience with the company they go with. So you can't rely too much on what people say because every label is different. So it's all about you making your own decision with that, really, because it's good to get a really good relationship going with a distribution company, and it's preference as well, because for us, we went with Above Board, and Above Board really do specialize in dance music, and we really like their roster. So that's why we, for example, went with them. When it comes to the music, it's really, again, up to you how you want to approach this. So, as I said, me and Shez had this plan to start Hooversound for a really, really long time, and then we hadn't properly launched it. We had all the graphics done, we had the name sorted, we'd registered it, but we didn't tell the world. And what we decided to do before telling the world is I put this tweet out here just saying, hi, starting a label, send us your demos, would love to hear them. And it just, that kind of felt like a soft launch, well, what we thought was going to be a soft launch, but it actually just blew up on Twitter. Everyone was talking to us about it. And there's a real mixture, like when you see numbers on social media, we thought, okay, let's see if actually people do send us stuff. And we refreshed the inbox and there was loads of demos in there. So what we ended up doing was, it was a mixture of music and artists that we had already made a list of that we wanted to work with and that we'd been talking to. And then we went through the demos in our inbox and kind of blended the two to put our release schedule together, and then started reaching out to all of them. Again, it's all about the planning ahead, especially when you're trying to launch. And also we didn't know what was about to happen with COVID, and also the Brexit got in the way. So yeah, it's all about planning ahead. I can't stress that enough. One of our big things that Hooversound, like the idea behind it, was to really build up our catalogue. So when we started it, we wanted to create a community of artists who are like-minded. We didn't want it just to be one-off releases or one-off things. We wanted this community aspect to it. It was really important. And we just wanted everything to look the same. So as you can see here, every release has a similar kind of look. So you know that it's a Hooversound release. So when you go on our Bandcamp page now, you can just see all of our releases in one. And the goal is, for years to come, is for this catalogue to be huge. Fingers crossed. Outside of music, you have to do more, right, nowadays. You want to grow a brand. So we actually initially planned a party last year, I think it was April, and we had to cancel it due to COVID. We then planned this one in the same place, Pickle Factory in London. Was meant to happen on the 9th, but obviously due to the 21st being delayed, this is now going to get rescheduled to later this year, but it will happen eventually. And again, with that, we're going to use a lot of the artists from the label that we've worked with to bring them back in. Again, something else that's really important is merch. So as you can see here, these are Hooversound t-shirts that we'll be putting on sale soon. And those are really exciting to make. And again, we've used different designers for all these types of things. Just going back to COVID. So yeah, there was a lot of things that affected us. So we launched the label. We decided to create the label in probably 2018. We started working on the label in 2019, and then we officially launched our first release on Friday the 13th of March in 2020. So that release initially was meant to come out a few months before, but it was still a bit of a learning curve for us with what we were trying to do and how long things take. And then the difference with COVID is that, so for example, when you want to press a release to vinyl, we were told it takes a minimum of 8 weeks. So you need to get your tracks mastered, your artwork done, everything ready to go, your plan in place when it comes to press. Everything needs to be packaged up like your end product is there. Then you send it off for it to be pressed to vinyl. And then those vinyls, you need to check those, your test presses, then you need to do your final pressing. So 8 weeks is fine. What's happened with COVID is that people were ill, obviously. Places had to shut. So there was less people in the plants, less manufacturing happening. So the chain of command, the chain of processes all got slowed down. And you've got to remember, when things were completely shut because no one knew what was going on yet, and they just had to shut, the backlog began of all the other labels and all these artists who were waiting for their vinyls to be pressed. So that lead time that was 8 weeks, get everything in 8 weeks before, you'll be fine, is now around 13 to 16 weeks. And there's some plants that now are actually saying they can't do anything for 2021. Luckily, we're okay. I spoke to our distro earlier this week to check about this because, again, communication. And I said, look, I've seen that some people aren't getting vinyls for the rest of this year. How's this going to affect us? And he said it's 13 to 16 weeks. Now, that is a really, really long wait, but it's knowing that. So as soon as you know that, just plan for that. Again, with the parties being cancelled, it's just one of those things that it's happening to everyone right now, but it's just the way that you deal with it. You're like, right, cool, we're going to just rearrange it, speak to the artists again, and sort it out. There was a big scare because I remember very clearly, like when we were going to release the first one last year, and I remember SHERELLE calling me and saying, should we push it back? Because what's happening like in the world? And no one knew how to deal with this, right? COVID was a very new thing to us all. And she was like, should we delay it? Should we push it back? And I was like, I'm not sure. We've put so much work into this, and the date, again, with all the planning ahead, this is the date it's coming out now. It's already delayed. Also, we don't know if if this thing is gonna last a few months or it's gonna last a year, and we can't really delay. Let's just roll with it. But the reason for that was because we worked so hard, everything was in place. But the reason that we're thinking of delaying is that a lot of dance music is about playing it out in a club, That's how you find new music. That's part of the experience of listening to dance music. It's heavily reliant on nightlife and night culture and club culture. So that affects where our music's getting played and who's going to support our music. So if DJs aren't playing clubs and festivals, they might not be buying dance music. And Hooversound is it's music for the club. That's like part of our brand. So there's all these things that are going through our heads, but also, you have to just think about it logically. What makes sense for you? Everyone's different, I know a lot of my friends make music and they did delay their releases, and that's fine. If that works for you, fine. But I think everyone's different. So just look at the pros and cons. Hopefully it's going to get better, but yeah, it did have a massive, massive effect on us. But we're not alone. So yeah. I feel like I tried to cover a lot of the journey, but I'm sure you guys have some questions.
I've got some loaded here from people that sent them in before. So I'll ask some of the easy ones to start, and then we'll get into the harder ones. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, so yeah, I guess you've answered how far. So someone asked, what's the difference between a label and a distributor?
Yeah, so a label does a lot of the communication between the artist and the digital. It's like cutting out the artist, because the artist wants to be creative and make all the music, and then sometimes they don't want to deal with the logistics, which we totally understand. So the label will speak to a distribution company, and what the distribution company does is they'll work closely with a pressing plant, to sort the vinyls out. Sometimes they ship them for you as well. And it is their responsibility to put it up on DSPs. So your Apple Music, your Spotify, your Bandcamp, they do all that for you, depending on the deal that you've got with them, but most of them will do that. So they take a lot of that stress. Also, they pitch to Spotify and Apple Music and places like that for playlist support and things like that. So they do a lot of the heavy lifting because they're basically putting your music out there to the world and you're sending them the music. And some of them, so we work with 1087 Mastering and they work with our distro. So we actually just do all our mastering through our distro as well. So everything's quite centralized. But yeah, that is mainly what a distribution company will do.
Sweet. And then someone else asked, can someone be signed to multiple labels? So are Hooversound artists kind of exclusive to the label?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Artists can sign to different labels, but what a lot of labels will do is have some sort of exclusivity in their contracts. So for example, with Hooversound, we don't want to invest all this time and money into an artist who's going to be releasing loads of music at the same time. It doesn't make it feel as special. So what we've done is if you release with Hooversound, you don't have an EP release a month either side. So then we can like really build up this one release with Hooversound. Some labels will do that for a lot longer. So like some exclusivity will be like 6 months. It will be even longer. It really does depend on the label that you're working with. But I think a lot of artists are used to labels asking for a bit of exclusivity. Some don't ask for any at all, but you can sign to lots of different labels as an artist, release your music through lots of different channels. It's just about being smart and not overdoing it in a way, because you want to put a lot into one release, so it's really special.
Yeah. You spoke about some of the labels. This is my own question, actually. Some of the labels at the beginning that you were kind of into, like what was it about? Maybe like Warp Records, or like I saw like Swamp 81 on there. What was it about those labels in particular that you liked in terms of aesthetic and the way they did things? Like,
and they were just really cool. I just remember thinking, these are cool. And also when you think of the artist, you think of the label. And I think that's really, really important, that there's such a relationship between the artist and the label that you relate them both together. So you don't ever think of the artist and not go, oh, that's a Swamp 81, or do you remember their release on Warp? And also they've continued to release with the same artists, and there's that community feel to it, which I think is a real important thing, that you continue to work with the same artists rather than just do one release with one artist and then just move on and keep going through it. Like bring in new people for sure, but I really like the community aspect. And there's a lot of record labels that are actually based in London that my friends run, so like Local Action and Scuffed Recordings, and they've got that community feel to them as well, working with similar artists, and it's just a real nice vibe.
I'm going to answer some from the chat box as well. They got everyone adding questions. Adversatile artists ask how you're gauging the workload for working week. So like how much time and effort you put into it week to week.
Yeah.
On top of everything else you're doing as well. So if you run through maybe everything as a whole, like what's your week look like?
Yeah. So my week is so Tuesdays and Thursdays, I actually do a bit of freelance production work for Reprezent Radio. So I go to the studios in Brixton and I do that. And then Monday, Wednesday and Friday, I'm usually recording shows for Apple Music. That used to be live, but is still pre-recorded. But those are usually like early finishes. And then normally I'd use those days to like hunt for new music and plan sets and then do any other freelance jobs I've got on. And you have to dedicate those half a days to, right, I'm going to do Hooversound emails for like the rest of today. It does pile up if you leave it, like it's your inbox will just pile up. And you know, I think people do understand that Sherelle and I are busy, but me and Sherelle do like we just reply to emails every day, even if it's on the go, just because we don't want to leave things and let it pile up. It is a lot more time consuming than I think either of us thought it would be. And that's one thing that I would definitely say, prepare yourselves for, because, you know, if you've got a Monday to Friday full-time job and then you're trying to run a label, just be sure that you have that time. Or even if you're going to dedicate your Sundays, do it, because it's definitely worth it. It's been a great journey, but yeah, it does take up a lot of time. And especially if you're in a similar position to Sherelle and I, where we didn't have experience of working with a label before, all we did was radio, and we've had experience of working with artists. So this was a massive learning curve. So that's super important as well, because that takes a lot of time to learn everything on the go.
Okay, and then Alex Riley asks, how's the lead time affected your release strategy?
So everything, so like when me and Sherelle were first starting, we were like, right, we're going to have one release out a month. Do you know how hard that is to put a vinyl out every month? Like,
yeah,
we could have done it if it was digital, but we wanted to do vinyls. And yeah, it has massively affected it, because we haven't done a release a month. We've done one maybe every 2 months. And, you know, there's certain things that have slowed the process down outside of the vinyls, because you can't put something on vinyl until the artists are 100% happy with it, right? Because then it's on there forever. So there's been certain cases where we've had artists in for a remix, and that remix has taken a lot of back and forth of changing it around and making sure everyone's happy, and that also slows things down. So yeah, the vinyl lead time thing has been a big pain, but there's also loads of other things that can delay it. So yeah, I'm really happy that we've managed to do what we have done, but it's no way at the speed we thought we would. And then it's kind of just slowed down because of COVID. And then we did the last couple of releases, we've actually only done digital releases for, because we still had a backlog of vinyl that we were waiting to send out. So what we've done is we've tried to clear that backlog, get back to like on top of everything. We've done the last 2 releases digital only, because what we're going to do is we're going to press them later this year, well actually sooner rather than later. And what we're doing is we're pairing releases together. So when you've got an EP of 3 tracks or 4 tracks, and then another EP of 3 or 4 tracks, and those 2 artists happen to have worked together, we were like, well, we could put this on this, they've got a similar audience, we could actually put this on one vinyl. So we're actually doing that. So the digital releases are separate, but when we press it to vinyl, it'll be like a joint A side as one artist, B side as the other artist. And that cuts down a lot of costs, and it speeds up the process, because it means that they're getting their vinyls quicker. I'm realizing the sun is like hitting me and I look a bit godlike right now.
I'm going to answer Abby Gray's question is, so above board do your vinyl and digital distribution, right?
Yeah.
And then she asked what quantity of vinyl do you press for each release? Some people keep that private, but like if you want to answer, you can.
Yeah, so it's actually more expensive to press less vinyl, right? So some companies will actually, so say if you speak to some distro and you say, I want to put this on 50 vinyls, they might be like, well, you've got to think in the way that they work, and it's actually more cost effective for them to press 300 because of the money that goes into it. So economies of scale and all that, it's difficult, because especially if you're working with super underground artists and you think, right, they're maybe going to sell out 100, 200 vinyls, but sometimes some distro will say you have to press 300. So yeah, with us, it's been a mixture, because we're really lucky that we actually have quite a close relationship with our distro, and they really understand that we're a startup label, we're learning, and we've switched it around, and we've seen some releases really pop off, so we've pressed some more. Some are slightly slower, so it is trial and error, but yeah, you'll find that your distro will have something to say about how many they think you should press as well. What makes sense from them from a business point of view, if that makes sense.
Right. And Peter asks, are you preparing your label to adopt an NFT model in the future? I'm not sure.
If someone can tell me what NFT actually is, then yeah, maybe.
Okay, and another question about what ways do you recommend sourcing funding for a new label? That's
a really good question, actually, and something I think that Sherelle and I could be better at, because I'll be completely honest with you guys, one of the cons of starting a label is it costs a lot of money. So when Sherelle and I when we wanted to originally do this, I don't think we were in a position to. and we had to wait to actually launch it because the initial launch is, it's an expensive thing to put together and put out to the world. But I've worked at Reprezent for a while, and I've seen and learned how funding works, because they do a lot of funding applications because they work with young people. So there's definitely things out there, and I think, again, speaking to people, so for example, I'm quite close with the station manager at Reprezent, Adrian, who always says to me, look, if you need a hand with any learning how to maybe write an application for some money to help Hooversound, I'm happy to help you, and things like that. So do speak around to people, because there is definitely ways to help. Yeah,
and this as well. the NextGen fund is here to help get you there. So that's why we're hosting today. So as if kind of asked a question about financing, and what are your thoughts on kind of artist ownership rights? How do you have that conversation with people? And then you don't have to say about your deals in particular, but what's your kind of views?
Yeah, so before we even sign anything, or even before a contract is sent, we wanted to speak to the artists and get a clear idea of what they're after, and if Hooversound is the right thing. So for example, we're releasing someone's album later this year, and we've had Zoom calls. We want to make sure that we're both on the same page. And when you do those conversations, because you've got to remember, it's not just about rights, it's about we've got to decide if the artwork's okay, if the mastering, the company we're using is cool, there's just so much, the video, the assets, and then in that conversation you'll start talking about the T's and C's, so which is always good to do, because then you're going to amend the contract. And it's knowing what Hooversound wants, but also you have to be a bit flexible, because you've got to remember your place in a way. We're really happy with how Hooversound is. We're so proud of everything we've done, but we have to remember we've only been about for a year, so you can't be asking for the world from artists, right? So just figure out what they want, what they're comfortable with. If that aligns with what your label is comfortable with, then it's all good. But yeah, it's all about being flexible and having those clear, transparent conversations.
Yeah, there's definitely no one size fits all in terms of deal, especially in this time. Just the way, I don't know, you might plan something out, everything could completely change in a week or 2 weeks. People that were doing album launch parties next week, just all of that's gone out the window. I've got a couple of more here. So what are the cons of starting a label?
Cons of starting a label, so
compared to when you were just say DJing, just enjoying the music purely, what do you think is the kind of different relationship now that you have with music and dance music and maybe everything else?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of mentioned it, the money aspect, right? There's a lot of initial costs, startup costs, because the logo needs to be designed, the company needs to be registered. I'm speaking to a lawyer on the phone. That lawyer is not giving me his time for free. It's all these little things that add up. So you definitely need to be in a position where you're comfortable, because I think this DIY generation that we live in is so amazing, but also please be comfortable in where you are to be able to start a new platform and grow, because there's always going to be initial startup costs. That was difficult. I think other cons is the time thing, for sure, especially at the beginning when, like I said, when SHERELLE and I weren't really aware of how long things take. That's something you've really got to prioritize, to figure out when you're going to do this. You've got to treat it like a job, especially if you want to, you're working with artists. Artists are trusting you to look after their passion, their music. So you've got to treat it like a job, give yourself actual hours. But it's just there's been times I've been in meetings, I feel a lot more confident now, but obviously a year ago, and there was a lot of words coming my way, and I was like, I don't know what half of this is. And again, it's just experience and it's learning. And it's being in those meetings and asking those questions is really important.
So do you have like long-term aims, like you two, just for what you want the label to be and to become, and like how much of that has changed since, you know, the pandemic and like those early conversations?
Well, I would love to put on a party. It's been cancelled twice. So yeah, I'd love to put on a party, and so we want to continue to release music. Obviously, we want to be working with some of the artists that we've already worked with and create this community. We want to still be pushing. So I think that it's really cool how we've worked with like well-known artists as well as underground artists. It's like a really nice balance of the both worlds like colliding. And also a lot of what we've tried to do is when we do get a really big artist who's got an audience, we get them to remix maybe someone who's not as well known. So it's like really collaborating. And I love that about Hooversound. So yeah, continuing to do that, continuing to release music. SHERELLE and I have like our individual goals with what we're doing outside the label, which actually also does affect the label, which is amazing because we want everything to like connect. And then really, I would absolutely love to do more events, which leads to a Hooversound stage at a festival. I think that would just be wicked, and then grow from there, really.
So what are your kind of personal aims as well, like while we're here? Just so people can see how it kind of stacks up, because you're working for Apple Music, Reprezent, and then, I don't know, do you have like other aims, of NAINA aims?
Yeah, so, again, like I think a lot of what SHERELLE and I do is about being tastemakers and introducing people to new sounds and new artists and new scenes, new music. So continuing to do that through Reprezent. We also have a show on NTS, and then I have a show on Apple Music, and she has a show, she's a BBC Radio 1 resident. So like we feel like we've got a lot of radio ground covered between the two of us, and we want to continue to use those platforms to bring through all these new artists. So that works really well. And we've already been doing that with a lot of our Hooversound artists. Outside of Hooversound, I actually work quite closely with some South Asian collectives. So there's me and a friend who he runs No ID, and I help him with it, which was a series of parties that's based on South Asian DJs. And since we started that, there's been a growth in other collectives doing the same. So there's a new one called Daytimers, and there's Chullo, there's Juice Droplet, there's all these things that have had a knock-on effect, and there's more creatives, South Asian creatives, who have come together to create collectives, and now these collectives are coming together to do more things for the South Asian scene. So, because I've always felt a bit like there's South Asian DJs and artists out there. I just need to find them. I think we all need to be connected. So doing a load of work on that as well, which fits quite nicely into everything else we're doing.
And do you find that that influences ideas that you have for Hooversound, even though it might have like a different musical palette? Like when you're, I don't know, like working with the South Asian collectives, you're like, oh, this is a good idea, I can apply over here, or like on the radio. Like how much do things fit together, or do you have it kind of view it quite separately?
Yeah, I think they're like separate scenes, but then they're connected by like the love of music, if that makes sense. So when it comes to South Asian producers, there's a lot of them that are like creeping onto the scene that are making this like really cool electronic music, and it's that lefter sound that we are all about at Hooversound. So it's like me and SHERELLE are always at the forefront of our minds, wanting to work with you know, women producers and people of color, and that is one thing that we're really trying to champion with both. Like there's the stuff that I do with the South Asian community, there's SHERELLE that's started a label called Beautiful, which is especially for Black musicians, and we're both trying to channel those things into everything we also do at Hooversound, to make everything kind of connected. Yeah, and it's all just connected by the love of music, really.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Thank you, NAINA. Thank you so much.